let's talk a few minutes about agents of socialization. In other words, what are those factors or from outside that seem to impinge and teach us how to deal with the culture and the mores and norms and customs of our culture, and what we should be expecting to deal with the environment, to do in order to deal with the environment. And you know that it does interact with these things that we've talked about until now, such as the stages, psychosocial stages, and of course the different events that occur throughout life. So we are going to keep that in mind, but we want to talk a little bit about what these actual entities are that teach us how to become that social being which will be part of the society. Now, we must first talk about the idea of primary groups. Primary groups are such things are groups that we are members of, which we have an emotional connection to, and it sort of identifies us as part of that group. The first and foremost of that is, of course, the family, which is the most important of the socialization agents, in that it actually teaches our primary modes of behavior. We have the models of adult behavior. We're taught how to take, for instance, let's say you can think about how your family was, or would be, not was, but would be in extreme situations. How might your family react? Let's say if you were in the Gulf War in Israel, when there were Scud missiles coming into the area, and everybody had to put on their gas masks, go into a sealed room, and stay there for hours and hours. And how might your family react? Would they be joking around and making fun and taking pictures of how funny you look inside the gas mask, and make them think I'm nervous because the children don't want to put them on, and come and get them on already, come, what's the thing's wrong with you? Every family has its own manner of dealing with situations, and of course it deals with simple situations also. So these are and that's the example that was actually brought down in our textbook. So it's the family which is probably the first and foremost of the primary agents of organization, of socialization. It teaches our sense of self, our sense of social identity. Additionally, from the family, you will know, you will learn which groups you belong to and you don't belong to. The family will teach you if you are male or female, and what males or females have to act like. If you are an African American or an Asian American or a Jewish or whatever, or an African or South African, wherever it is, or a Korean, what a Korean behavior is, etc. It also helps us realize our human capacities, how much we can do and we can't do. So all these things will be involved in these agents of socialization. And of course, it's not only the family, there are other groups also. So each group that you belong to will become an agent of socialization. I mean, if you're a group, every group, that every two people together will start, because I think when you're younger you have peer groups, but that's not those aren't primary. Let's look at another example of a primary group would be like a military unit. A military unit, after you've gone through this total institution and a resocialization, the unit itself becomes your point of reference for who you are. And this is really important, because when you go out, first of all, your identity is no longer an identity for yourself. You're part of the unit. And in a battle, this becomes extremely important, because you're really fighting for the guy next to you. You're not fighting for victory so much as, he got Joe, I'm going to get him. And it's a very important concept. The same thing would happen in a monastery, for instance. Your monastery group is point of reference. It becomes your primary group. Once you have groups like this,
You have in-groups and out-groups. There's differences between whether or not you put it's your group or somebody else's group, okay? And the existence of an out-group heightens the loyalty for the in-group, right? There it becomes, we are us and not them, okay? This is a very important factor in many social social trends and social actions. When we call, if we're going to classes or castes or prejudice or achievement oriented groups, many of these are founded on the principle that we have an in-group and an out-group. It is us versus them. Very important. Another idea which we might want to look at. I mentioned only slightly the idea of a peer group. Now, a peer group is not necessarily a primary group, although sometimes it can be, especially when an adolescent decides that the peer group is more important than the family. His connection, emotional connection to the peers is much more important than anything else. So it can be, but it's the group who we belong together. And sometimes even, like for instance in a gang, the peer group replaces the family completely. And so it no longer is just a mere peer group. It becomes a primary group which supports the whole idea of socialization, practically a total institution, where every movement you make is in reference to that group. If it's not quite that strong, then it would be a peer group with levels of peer pressure, which needs to be thought about, measured, discussed in order to understand exactly how that is influencing the behavior. Now, besides the groups that we might belong to, there's also other agents of socialization, and in particular one might want to look at the effects of media, mass media in particular, television. We grow up in the society watching a huge amount of television. What sort of messages are given over through the mass media, through television, through radio, through newspapers, and more through the internet and things like that? How much are we exposed to different messages? At one point, for instance, in the movies, when people were going to movies, it was very common for people to be smoking. It was it was sexy to smoke, and especially if a man were lighting a woman's cigarette. So these were it gave messages that this is the way that a person really wanted to be a Marlboro man. That was an epitome of masculinity. Of course, that's not quite what it is today. I mean, when you think that a child will watch an average of 4 hours of television a day, that's amazing. Amazing amount of influence that needs to be taken into account as an agent of socialization. Today, we have a new program which is pushing the limits. Until today, for instance, if you gave a story of deviance, which we'll cover in a later chapter, especially if it was geared towards teenagers, teenage pregnancy, drugs, sex, etc. Every television program would come in some way or another show how, even though it seems to be pushing some sort of deviance, there was some sort of redeeming factor of something going wrong. There was some sort of overdose if someone was taking drugs, or unwanted teen pregnancy if there was too much sex. And today, all of a sudden, there's a new program called Skin. I don't know if you've heard of it, and in which doesn't seem to be that. And also, they're taking teenage actors to do it. So there's a lot of questions about how this mass media is portraying and pushing socialization onto our society. Furthermore, let's talk a little bit about the social media, which is an important factor in our way of
learning how to communicate, what is our social life going to be like? Do we have levels of communication which are completely new and unexplored? Let's take, for instance, there was recently, I saw an article about a fellow who was completely isolated from his family. He had a job as I believe it was a cashier in the stores, a 35-year-old man. He was writing articles. He had a blog and some other internet communications, and he passed away. And not many people at his funeral know, but nobody actually knew. But when he apparently had quite a following on the internet, his social life was through the social media, through different levels, and there became a following for him with testimonials and memorials, and going on through his other consolidations of his other messages and poetry and observations of life on the social media itself. Or, as we mentioned before, such things as Second Life, where people can build up their own social society, which is independent from the real world. Very unusual and very interesting concepts that we really want to think about in the idea of socialization and the effects of what socialization could be. These are very important. Now, why would it be practical? Well, of course you can think when somebody is, for instance, in many parts of the world, you might have the uses of mass media in order to indoctrinate certain ideas, such as Mickey Mouse telling stories of grandeur when you become a suicide bomber. That it's his goal of Mickey Mouse, obviously not the American Mickey Mouse, another Mickey Mouse, which is on state-run radio, state-run television, to convince small children to become suicide bombers and blow themselves up in public places and their enemies' territory. This is obviously a type of socialization which has far-reaching effects throughout the world. So this is things we want to think about and understand, that things need to be looked at not only as they seem from our point of view, but rather all these other culturalizing, socializing, mass media, or family structure questions, which can affect not only their particular culture, but the interactions between one culture and the next, and sometimes even our very lives.